Hey, fifth graders. Today we're going to talk about what makes realistic fiction. Now, if we look at just the words realistic fiction, it doesn't really sound right. Realistic often means lifelike, and fiction means not real life. So, how is it both lifelike and not real life? It sounds super confusing to me. Realistic fiction is a story that didn't really happen, but it could have. It's based on the real world that we live in and portrays life as it is. One way I like to think about realistic fiction is, let's say you want to tell a story of how you wish things would have gone. Maybe instead of being snowed in at Thanksgiving last year, you wanted to go to your grandmother's house. So if you wrote a story about how it would have gone had you gone to your grandmother's house, that would be an example of realistic fiction. There are some major points that realistic fiction does contain. So, what elements are contained in a realistic fiction story? Well, realistic fiction stories tend to take place in the past, recent past, or present, not in the very far past and not in the future. Realistic fiction also has characters that are involved in events that could really happen. Okay, characters also live in places that could be or are real. The difference between could be or are real would be the example of, well, Rapid City is real, so maybe they live in Rapid City. Or maybe they may live in a made-up town, but that made-up town has all real elements. That would also be considered realistic fiction. Next, the characters seem like real people with real issues solved in a realistic way. This means this kind of cancels out princess stories and just anything that seems way too out there. We have a lot of those. The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games has some realistic elements, but it's not really based on real people. And their issues are definitely not real. Another example would be all the Marvel superheroes, right? They definitely don't have realistic issues, and they are absolutely not solved in realistic ways. All right, and lastly, events portrayed in realistic fiction conjure questions that a reader could face in everyday life. This means that the characters have to deal with real issues that you or I or your mom or your dad or anyone may have to deal with in real life. All right. So when you have all of those, you have a good realistic fiction book. So now we're going to play a little game of this or that. All right. Realistic fiction stories tend to take place in the present or recent past. So, which one of this or that do you think is most likely to be realistic fiction? Right. It is definitely the house on the right. The futuristic space world would not fit in a realistic fiction book. Next, we have characters that are involved in events that really could happen. So, maybe one day they might go to Mars, but it's not really probable. However, swimming in a race, very probable. So which one would you say between this or that? Definitely swimming. Next, characters live in places that could be or are real. All right, on the left, we have the African Safari area, African Sahara. That's what I was looking for. And then on the right, we have some sort of magical underwater godlike world. So obviously, which one would you say belongs in the realistic fiction book? The African safari. Next, characters seem like real people with real issues solved in a realistic way. So Diary of a Wimpy Kid versus Harry Potter. Which one belongs in the realistic fiction? If you guessed Harry Potter, you are wrong. Magic and wands and wizardry do not belong in realistic fiction. However, despite the cartoon front, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is all real life actions. All right, and lastly, the events portrayed in realistic fiction conjure up questions that a reader could face in everyday life. So, on the left, we have going for a hike and maybe running into a little bit of danger, maybe a snake, maybe getting lost, or having to get in a lightsaber battle with a clone. Which one could you face in your everyday life? I'll give you a hint. I live right next to the forest and I can go for a hike anytime I want, but I don't have a twin, nor do I have a clone. So it is definitely option on the left, going for a hike. All right. Well, thank you guys for playing and listening. Now you know the elements of what makes an excellent realistic fiction book. I know you read one yesterday on your Monday reading, so keep an eye out in the future and try to decide if the genre of book that we are reading could be realistic fiction.